Okay, so welcome into the personal statement for spreadsheets. And this is what we're going to look at today. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through the various questions. I'm just going to give suggestions for what could be completed in each area. Obviously, I can't give direct answers, but we can suggest some things and some areas that you might want to develop around each question. So the first thing to bear in mind, some people miss this little box at the top where you've got the candidate's name, the date and the assessor name. Obviously the assessor name's my name, but people sometimes miss that. So just make sure that box gets completed. That's always a good thing to do. Where it says document name, basically the whole of this personal statement relates to one of the spreadsheets you created. And the name of that spreadsheet goes in here under document name. So that's just, you've done 2 for this course, so you just pick one of the documents and then you write about that document throughout this personal statement, and the document name goes in there so that we can refer back to it when we're marking and check that it all makes sense together. Okay, so that's the first bit, the document name. So then let's have a look at 1.1. And what we've tried to do with each of these questions is sometimes there's a minimum words just to indicate sort of how important they are. But what we've done is we've often sometimes broken the question down and given 2 or 3 separate questions. And so notice if there is more than one question, and that'll make it easier for you to answer. What it basically is we've once upon a time had to do long essays, and so what we then changed it to was sort of more of a guided, structured question system, and we found that people were giving us better responses that way. So this first one is just like I just mentioned. So it's sort of 3 questions, and we've sort of given prompts and hints on each one. So what will the document be used for? So let's imagine that it was, and what I also suggest is just making notes, either on the screen or with a bit of paper as I go through each of these, and that will probably help you come to complete it. So what will the document be used for? Who is the intended audience, and where will it be used? So the where will it be used is the easiest part, and that is, is it going to be printed out? Is it something that is going to be filed away, or is it just the electronic copy going to be kept, and so it's just going to be viewed on the screen? And are you creating it for a line manager? Is it going to be sent to somebody else? So that's the sort of the latter part of that question. What will the document be used for? Well, that will be whatever the document you have created. I can't really give any generic answers for that because there are so many different uses. So a personal budget planning is a completely different what will the document be used for than a list of library books and things like that. And then the third element of this is who is the intended audience. So are you doing it for yourself? Is it for a colleague? Has it been requested by a line manager? So just think about who the intended audience or targeted audience is. Okay, so moving down to 1.2. Got a frog in my throat here. There we go. Okay, so what application software and tools will be used and why, and how is the information structured? So generally most of you are using Microsoft Excel, and the version that you want to put down, so whether it's 2003 or 2007 or 2010, but some people could be doing this with OpenOffice, or there's another one called NeoOffice, which is sort of free versions, and the course can be done just as well with those. So that's sort of what application and what tools will you be using inside it. Just mainly keep this because there's a question later on about the specific types of elements within inside the software that you're using. So we'll just keep it that. And so how will the information be structured? So say, for example, we were doing a budget, then you might talk about where I've decided to lay it out over a number of months with all my bills down one side, and you could just talk about why you've structured it in such a way. It might be that is very easy to read, and that you each month you receive a certain amount of information, and so a month by month one. But if you were paid weekly, for example, then you might do a weekly budget. So how will it be structured? Again, relates specifically to what it is you're creating. Next one down. What information do you need to include, and how will you find out this information? So sometimes you don't always have access to all the information. You might be waiting for somebody else to send you some information. If you were doing a spreadsheet on different departments, you might need to wait for a different department or a different shop to send you the information that you need. You might be waiting for an updated price list. So, or you may already have the information. So just talk about what it was going to include. If it was a budget, then you'd need to know how much you spent in the previous month and how much income you had coming in. And so just that's the sort of things we're looking for in there. Okay. Are there any factors that may affect the task? And so this is just are there any things that you can see ahead of time that could make it tricky? Somebody already mentioned that they only had a certain number of days a week, so availability of time. There could be some instances where you've been asked to produce a very large, fancy spreadsheet, but you might not have the time or the budget or the resources to do it. What we mentioned in the previous question, how will you find out this information? Well, if you're waiting on somebody else to send you some information, then that might affect the task. So this is just sort of a planning stage, and just thinking about what potential issues there could be to affect it. Next one is describe any local constraints or guidelines that may apply to this task. And that sounds a bit tricky, but what that's referring to is are you bound by sort of data protection in your work? Do you have to be careful not to include sort of customers' names? Is there a maximum file size, for example, that you've got to work to? Does it have to be done by a certain deadline? Okay. There's another a thing we've written there about house style. You know, some companies have a very uniform look to all the documents they produce, and it always has to include logos and things like that. Does your company fall into those sort of constraints? And then we've got describe any legal guidelines that may affect the work being produced. So is any of this information copyrighted? Is the software that you're using licensed to you? So I think somebody mentioned that they don't have the same software at home as they do at work. So that's a sort of a software licensing issue. You know, the number of copies of the license that you've got isn't enough for all the places that you might want to use it. So they probably, and notice the legal guidelines, there's no word limit by that. So if there are no, you know, there may not be any legal constraints, and so we're not forcing you to write about things if there really aren't there. So this first section, the first page, can often be thought of as all about the planning of the document that you're creating. The second page is more about how you go about producing it and reviewing it and things like that. So looking at the next question down, what tools did you use to help format, edit and lay out your work? So there's a whole bunch of different tools that we've gone over in the training. We looked at borders and shadings, so they can be used to sort of structure and lay out, as well as things like what else have we got? We've got bold, italic. You can have things underlined. You can use the borders and shading. So you can draw borders and edges around it, and maybe even think of something. We did conditional formatting, so you could include conditional formatting. So you know, these are sort of different things, but you have to say what exactly you've done on your particular piece. Okay, so the next one. What are the benefits and drawbacks of using a computer software for the selected task? So what you need to do here is sort of, I mean, for me personally, my handwriting's appalling. My brain's not as fast as a computer's by a long way. So, you know, by doing it on a computer, mine would be a lot neater and a lot more accurate, although you do have to check, obviously, the formulas. What are some of the drawbacks? Well, if you've created it on a computer and you can't get access to the computer, if there's a power cut or it's saved on a memory stick and it corrupts, you know, you could lose that work. Whereas if you've got it handwritten in front of you, you know, and it's in a file, you're always going to be able to get at it. Okay, so think of some of the things, and you know, obviously come up with your own things that are benefits and drawbacks of using computers for the task. Okay. Then we've got the last, how many have we got left? 4, I think. 4 or 5. So assess the strengths and weaknesses of your final piece of work. So look at your work that you've done and say the things that you like about it and say the things that you don't like about it. Okay, so and we've just given some things underneath. So the format and layout, you know, are you happy with those? Is it an accurate piece of work? Is it suitable for the audience that we described previously? Is there a good quality of it? So, you know, just say the things you like about it and the things you don't like about it. And that's a 50-worder. So that's we want you to write a little bit, you know, quite a bit about that. And then sort of the next question sort of goes on from that. If there's any weaknesses in the document, how could you improve it? I mean, in fact, it doesn't even have to be a weakness. It could just be further improvements that you can see that you would like to, you know, ways to making it better. And again, we've put some ideas along the bottom there. I quite like the idea of if you could think of more efficient ways of doing things. You know, and that could be a case of, remember when we first started learning, then we would have we would write some formulas, and then later on we learned quicker ways of writing the same formulas. So instead of doing sort of A1 plus B1 plus C1 plus D1, we learned the sum formula that would sum them all together. And there may be better and more efficient ways of doing that you've learnt over the course of doing the same things that you've already done. So you should always obviously review and check your work just to make sure it's working, and that's what the next question's about. So you've laid out at the start of these personal statement what it was that you were creating and why you were creating it and who you were creating it for, and now you're reviewing to see if it fitted what you initially set it was going to do. Okay, so a really good way of getting feedback is to show your documents to somebody else. Okay, and obviously you're going to show them to me, and I'm going to give you feedback on them. But you may have shown them to some colleagues as well. And did you make any changes after you've received any feedback? I'll certainly, if it's not at the correct level, will give you some examples and ideas of ways that you can go about improving them. But so that's something that you might want to wait until you've all definitely had some feedback on your documents. Okay, and then the last 2 questions here. Describe a way of improving your own productivity. Okay, so your own productivity means describe ways of making you quicker and being able to do things, say maybe more accurately. And we've come up with some ideas there. So there are things like keyboard shortcuts. So you've got things like copy and paste, where instead of going up to the edit menu and choosing copy, you can do Control-C and you can do Control-V. And so that would improve your productivity because you get quicker. You can customize the whole toolbar and really choose what elements are laid out in the buttons for faster switching and things like that. And you could even go ahead and do things like recording macros. So just think about ways that you could improve your own productivity. And then finally, the last question is, how did you test check the completed task to ensure it worked as planned? And like I say, a good way of doing it is, you know, maybe to write that you showed it to somebody else, but that you could. There are ways that it shows you if there are errors in your spreadsheet. So you want to make sure you look for errors, make sure there are no errors in the spreadsheet. So we've gone through there quite quickly, but hopefully you've all made a variety of notes on what sort of thing we're going to look for here. So hopefully that's explained how we go about completing the personal statement. As ever, if anybody's got any questions, please get in contact with your assessor, and they will be only too happy to help. If people don't ask the questions, then people can't, you can't get help. So please ask the question if you're struggling in any way. Okay, see you next time.